For joining us here on WCNC Plus. I'm Jane Monreal. We switch you now. I told you about an hour ago. It was a busy Wednesday morning. We take you out now back to D.C. This is the House Natural Resources Committee, and they're going to talk among some of the things here, but the Gulf of America Act, as well as the markup of other bills. Let's listen in here live. It just got underway. You're watching Live Impact News on WCNC Plus.
Modernizing the Endangered Species Act and returning management back to the state level has been a priority of mine as chairman of the committee. Last year marked more than 50 years since the ESA was originally enacted. In that time, the federal government has lost its way when it comes to species management. The ESA was meant to identify wildlife most at risk, implement a recovery plan, and delist the species once it no longer needs protection. With a dismal 3% success rate of recovered species, it's time to switch up the plays and run a playbook that wins. We cannot continue to run a game plan that allows environmental groups to hijack federal regulations not to protect species, but to file lawsuits and to line their own pockets. We need to run a play that gives species management back to those who know it best, which are the state and local communities where these species exist. As we've seen in the hearings on today's legislation, local communities surrounded by the gray wolf live with startling consequences. Witnesses shared personal stories and images of cattle and family pets killed by the gray wolf. These stories are plentiful, like wolf populations themselves, and putting a chilling face to the costly consequences of America's failure to delist recovered species. And as a gesture to Representative Huffman, I know we agree that the endangered species list has been very successful in preventing extinction, which that's a good thing. But I think we can do more with the ESA in accomplishing its purpose of actually recovering species. And I hope we can work together to figure out how to make the recovery efforts better than, and to have better results going forward than what we've had in the past. Congresswoman Boebert's Pet and Livestock Protection Act brings the ESA back to its original intent and restores common sense to species management. The gray wolf is recovered, and it's time we treat it as such. And that's not just me saying it's recovered. The Fish and Wildlife Service has said it's recovered, but it's still been unable to take it off of the list. In addition to the regular order bills, we will call up 7 additional measures that minority and majority staff have worked on and reached bipartisan agreement. Each of these bills represents common sense solutions to problems our constituents face, such as returning power to states, streamlining processes, and reducing red tape. I look forward to our discussions on these issues today, and I yield back the balance of my time and now recognize Ranking Member Huffman for any opening statement that he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick point of correction for your reference to the body of water formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico. It's still the Gulf of Mexico. It has been for a couple hundred years, and I assure you it will continue to be in most of the reality-based world, no matter how much theater we bring to this in this committee. I do appreciate your kind words about Chairman Grijalva, and look, we know Chairman Grijalva was a fighter. And as such, he would surely want me to point out right now that across every federal agency under this committee's jurisdiction, Elon Musk and Doge are indiscriminately purging thousands of essential agency staff. They're thoughtlessly firing career scientists, tribal agency staff, land managers, park rangers, wildfire experts, and numerous other public servants who deliver critical services to the American people and safeguard our lands, waters, and communities. And amidst this unprecedented hollowing out of government, the hallmark legislation that we are considering here today is a bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico. It would be comical if it were not such a profound dereliction of duty. And what else is this committee choosing to ignore while we burn time on this political theater? Well, right now the Trump administration is actively obstructing funding for wildfire prevention to safeguard American lives and property, tribal resources essential for supporting Native communities, critical drought resilience programs urgently needed across the West, and funding for NOAA's storm and extreme weather forecasting. Has Republican committee leadership taken any action whatsoever to address or even acknowledge the serious issues caused by the administration's actions? The answer is obviously no. And one more crisis we're ignoring today that can't go unmentioned. In just the past week, President Trump's reckless tariff plan has driven our markets into turmoil. The S&P 500 is officially in bear market territory. The Dow is cratering. And for the average American, for teachers, firefighters, truck drivers, their 401ks and retirement savings are crumbling before their eyes. And that's without getting into the higher prices that we're all starting to see as these tariffs go into effect starting today. Is the majority doing anything about this looming economic catastrophe that, absent decisive intervention, will profoundly harm every sector of our economy and numerous programs under this committee's jurisdiction? Obviously, Republicans in this Congress are just too busy renaming things like the Gulf of Mexico. The many issues that we're neglecting today are not abstract problems. They're immediate threats to our constituents' safety, heritage, and livelihoods, and they're entirely avoidable problems caused by this administration, and caused by an administration that is going entirely unchallenged by this Republican Congress. And I do mean the whole Congress, because it's not just this committee that's neglecting these issues. Instead, the House voted on a budget framework that would guarantee devastating cuts to Medicaid and surrendered Congress's emergency authority over tariffs. Elon Musk is dismantling the Social Security Administration after calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme just a few days ago. Americans are not asking us to rename places in this moment. They're asking us to lower costs, to protect their savings, to fight for their future. They're asking us to confront and mitigate the real and immediate threats of drought and wildfire. They're asking us to stop the absolute chaos coming out of this administration. We urgently need congressional leadership to tackle the most pressing problems in America, and instead, we are here with distractions and culture war sideshows. We owe the American people better, much better than this. This committee has a proud tradition of addressing real significant problems for the American people, and sadly, today's markup represents another troubling departure from that tradition. It underscores a broader pattern by this Republican Congress of prioritizing partisan stunts so thoroughly that it cannot and will not carry out the real work of governing. Now, some might dismiss all of this is harmless theater, but every minute and taxpayer dollar spent on these distractions is time and money not spent on the issues that Americans care most about. I urge my colleagues to change course. Our constituents did not elect us to ignore real problems and to substitute political theater like this in the place of governing. Let's do our jobs and get back to giving the American people what they deserve. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to the markup notice, it is now in order to consider H.R. 276, Gulf of America Act of 2025. Ask unanimous consent that the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries be discharged from further consideration of the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized for purposes of debate on the bill? I recognize myself, and I speak in support of H.R. 276, the Gulf of America Act, which is sponsored by Representative Green of Georgia. This legislation seeks to codify a portion of President Trump's Executive Order 14172, restoring names that honor American greatness, which renamed the body of water formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. By enacting this legislation, we ensure consistency in the reference to laws, maps, regulations, and records. On his first day in office, President Trump signed Executive Order 14172, which directed the Secretary of the Interior, acting through the Chair of the Board on Geographic Names, to oversee renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Throughout our country's history, presidents have made changes to the names of America's lands and waters. Today, we are taking the necessary steps to codify this action into law permanently. The Gulf and its 1,600 miles of coastline within the United States are and will continue to be critical to our country's economy. The Gulf of America region is home to 14% of the United States' total crude oil production, 48% of the country's refining capacity, and 51% of its natural gas processing. President Trump has made it a priority of his administration to make America energy dominant, and that starts in the Gulf of America. It is nearly impossible to overstate the importance this region has in securing a future of American energy dominance. Along with energy, the Gulf is a lifeblood of commercial and recreational fishing, tourism, and is one of the most productive ecosystems in North America. President Trump's executive order and Representative Green's legislation embrace the numerous ways the Gulf of America powers the American economy. Americans have long been the dominant driving force behind the economic value of the Gulf, and this legislation simply reinforces the many ways that this treasured resource has benefited the United States. I thank Representative Green for her work on this legislation. The U.S. Geological Survey's Board on Geographic Names has already begun implementing the executive order, but passing this legislation through the committee will ultimately enact it into law. I urge my colleagues to support the legislation, and I yield back. Is there further discussion? Representative Huffman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when House Republicans finally tire of all of this political theater, all of this kissing up to Donald Trump, all of the burning of Congress's precious time and resources for absolutely nothing but show, for bootlicking and sycophancy, call us. We have a lot of serious work we would like to do with you. We have a lot of governing that we would like to do. But right now, our country is careening towards disaster under the Trump administration. His trade war is wreaking havoc on the economy. Our constituents are struggling to make ends meet with rising costs. Agencies aren't able to provide essential services for the American people because of the mass indiscriminate firings of federal employees, facility closures, chaotic government takeovers by Elon Musk and his tech bros at Doge. Agencies under this committee's jurisdiction have been gutted, kneecapped from doing their work to ensure public safety, mitigate wildfire risks, or protect our irreplaceable natural resources. We're not here to address any of that today. In fealty to the president, House Natural Resource Republicans are considering a joke of a bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. If you were to choose a bill that perfectly embodies the Republican Party at this moment in history, this might be it. The bill does absolutely nothing, but it kind of says everything. It captures the MAGA, anti-immigrant, imperialistic rhetoric of right-wing cable news and podcasts, while also giving cover for the president to censor and retaliate against news outlets that choose to call it the Gulf of Mexico, which, by the way, is what every other country on earth will continue to call it. It tightens the stranglehold billionaires in the oil and gas industry have on Team Extreme, while ignoring all of the chaos President Trump's policies are inflicting on Gulf Coast communities. President Trump might think he was the first to come up with this idea, the Gulf of America, but it was actually a comedian, Stephen Colbert, back in 2010. And at that time, oil was gushing from BP's blown Deepwater Horizon well that killed 11 people and crushed the coastal economy of Louisiana. Colbert called it the Gulf of America because, to quote him, "We broke it, we bought it." Republicans seem to have forgotten this incident as they advance their drill, baby drill agenda. But as we approach the 15th anniversary of the tragic Deepwater Horizon disaster, I would like to remind my colleagues, we continue to see record-breaking oil and gas production because for decades, Big Oil has clung to sweetheart deals that it receives from the federal government. And all of us pay the price. It's the surge in climate-driven disasters like the catastrophic wildfires in California, the cycle of extreme drought and flood across the West and the Midwest, supercharged hurricanes pounding the Southeast, and more. It's the unmatched levels of pollution in communities in the Gulf, primarily black, brown, and low income, which have become a sacrificial altar for the fossil fuel and petrochemical industries. And while Trump and Musk destroy our economy, our communities, and our planet, congressional Republicans can't even be bothered to face their own constituents at town hall meetings. But now, after weeks of silence, Republicans finally have a plan to address this compounding crisis. They're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico. This is what they think the American people want. And talk about unpopular. According to a recent Fox News poll, the majority of Americans actually oppose this name change. They know it's a joke. They know it's a stunt, even if President Trump and Republicans seem to be taking it seriously. You know what's not a joke? Firing firefighters, weather forecasters, disease researchers, aid workers, destabilizing global markets with mindless tariff taxes that are wrecking people's hard-earned retirement and college savings, turning our allies and neighbors into enemies, threatening to cut Social Security and Medicaid, services that will be in much greater demand once the Trump recession really gets rolling in the weeks and months to come. This is an insulting charade of America first nonsense at a time when the American people need serious policy prescriptions. Instead, we're getting stuff like this that makes our country a global laughingstock. I oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Stauber, you're recognized for 5
Thank
minutes.
you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of H.R. 276, the Gulf of America Act of 2025. The Gulf of America is one of the greatest crown jewels of the United States. Not only is the Gulf home to an ecosystem that supports diverse marine life and migratory species, it's also an incredible economic resource for the United States, ranging from tourism, recreation, commercial fishing, energy production, including renewable oil and gas production, shipping and trade, and so much more. The Gulf of America plays a significant role in the cultural identity of the United States and is enjoyed by countless Americans. And not only those who call the Gulf Coast home, but countless Americans across our great nation, including my home state of Minnesota. I believe renaming the Gulf to the Gulf of America is a great testament to this nation. And I am proud to support this legislation to codify President's January 20th executive order. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Hearing none, it is now in order to consider amendments to H.R. 276. Do you wish to be recognized, Ms.
Yes, sir, I do.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I can't believe that given everything of consequence that's happening in our country and the world right now, that the Natural Resource Committee is taking this piece of legislation seriously. That we're spending our time and taxpayer dollars on a bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America while there's so many more urgent and critical issues for us to deal with is just offensive, and it's an abrogation of our duty to the American people. I got elected to represent the people of my district and this country, not to kowtow to any one individual. Congress is a separate and equal branch of government, and our job is to serve as a check and balance to the executive branch, not to roll over and give up the authority directed to Congress by the Constitution that we all swore to uphold. It's April. We're about to enter hurricane season, fire season, we're in tornado season, and we aren't prepared because key people at NOAA, the Weather Service, the Forest Service, FEMA, and all of our disaster response agencies have been summarily dismissed, fired. These agencies are gutted with no thought to the importance of each individual's work, making the system more inefficient by making it harder to access disaster relief and emergency services. When we spend time on performative and jingoistic things like renaming the Gulf of Mexico, we're neglecting the serious work that we're sent here to do. It makes a mockery of the democratic process. And while we're spending time and taxpayer dollars doing this, the administration, with the blind support of my Republican colleagues, is kneecapping the federal workforce, busting unions and taking away collective bargaining rights, abducting legal residents and sending them to foreign prisons, trampling the right to free speech and due process, crashing the economies and the 401ks and pensions of hardworking Americans with these erratic and just, with these erratic tariffs and stealing the earned benefits of Americans, our veterans and Social Security recipients. And we're ignoring this to do what? To rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And to add insult to injury, this is an unfunded mandate. Who's going to pay to reprint the maps, the textbooks, the other printed and online material to reflect this change? Are we going to allocate even more taxpayer dollars to this crusade? Are we going to put this cost on taxpayer dollars in every individual state? This bill is a sycophantic attempt to wrap the American flag around this bill and does nothing to help Americans who are suffering and struggling to afford necessities, to create jobs. And those necessities, by the way, just got more expensive because of the aforementioned tariffs. It's not what we should be doing, and quite frankly, is embarrassing and making a mockery of this process. Let's do our damn jobs and do things of consequence. This committee does important work, and we have been able to work together to get things done. Let's continue to focus on that. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Mr. LaMalfa, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. It's kind of funny here watching the Dems go off for about 10 minutes on the bill so far, and then several speeches on it last time we heard the bill. Then I see there's a list of 20 amendments to the bill. It'd be real easy just to pass this little name change and not waste all this time we're hearing about wasting on the bill. It's coming from the other side with each of those amendments. If we hear them, it's going to be at least 5 minutes on one side, and then maybe the Republicans respond. So, 5 times 20, it's 100 plus, 20 times 2 responding by each Republican, that's 140 minutes or so. So at an
Would the
hour,
gentleman
that's 2
move to
hours.
pass them by unanimous consent? I mean, I will stipulate to that. We could just pass all the amendments by unanimous consent.
No, how about just the bill in chief instead all the time on the
Oh,
amendments,
okay,
okay?
thank you.
But taking my time back, thank you. We could hear a lot about wasting time here, but I'm more concerned about how much time ranchers are having to waste keeping wolves from devouring their livestock and defending themselves up there. But I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to keep track of the time a little bit. I'll give you 3 minutes back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Hearing none, it is now in order to consider amendments to H.R. 276. I recognize myself for the purpose of offering my amendment in the nature of a substitute designated Westerman 11 A&S. Without objection, the amendment is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Now, I urge my colleagues to support the A&S, which makes a small technical change to the short title of the bill. This A&S ensures that we recognize a name that honors American greatness by codifying a portion of Executive Order 14172, permanently renaming the area formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. I would like to thank Representative Green from Georgia for her work on this legislation. And I will say this is a simple bill. It does a simple thing, but I think it does carry a big message, and I think it's why President Trump did this on day one, when his agenda is to put America first, and he did that symbolically and literally by saying he's going to rename the Gulf of Mexico, which he has that authority to do, and we have the authority to codify that into a law. I think to lay the groundwork to say America is going to be first, and it's going to be America First policy in the legislation that we consider and hopefully move out of this committee in a bipartisan manner for the future of our country. Again, I urge support of this, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, it is now in order to consider amendments to the A&S to H.R. 276. I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Huffman number 3. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If Republicans on this committee are serious about renaming the Gulf of Mexico, we should at least be honest about what is driving all this. My amendment proposes that rather than calling it the Gulf of America, we acknowledge what this bill truly represents, which is a departure from science, history, and common sense. We should call it the Gulf of Ignorance. Now, I acknowledge that there could be a robust debate about other words that one could put in place of ignorance, and I would accept friendly amendments from folks who might have a case to be made that it should be the Gulf of Incompetence, maybe the Gulf of Arrogance, delusion, bootlicking sycophancy, strong case to be made that that would be appropriate, or maybe the Gulf of alienating our allies and neighbors. But the bottom line is, I agree with the majority of Americans who've been polled on this. The Gulf of Mexico doesn't need a different name. But if the majority wants to spend the committee's precious time and resources on symbolic gestures to glorify President Trump, then it's important that we also recognize all the burning priorities that you're choosing to ignore by wasting time on this. You know, we could be talking about ways to save lives by preventing catastrophic wildfires, or collecting and protecting climate and weather data to save communities from extreme storms, or restoring public access to National Park Service websites that Republicans are frantically trying to cancel because they talk about things like history and science and the environment. There is no shortage of things that people need us to do in this committee, that they want us to do, and you are choosing to play naming games. I have a hard time believing most people in the Gulf of Mexico who have endured devastating hurricanes and extreme weather events see this as a good use of Congress's time when we could be spending our time helping communities prepare for rising sea levels or the next natural disaster. In fact, an overwhelming number of Americans do not support renaming the Gulf. As I said, according to some credible polling, the Gulf is one of the most ecologically and economically vital regions in the Western Hemisphere, not just for the United States, but for a lot of other countries. It is home to productive fisheries, endangered species like the Rice's whale, unique deep-sea coral reefs and ecosystems. Its resources include resources that fuel industries, provide jobs, sustain coastal communities. And those real challenges, protecting ecosystems, building resilience, preparing for the future, deserve a seriousness. They deserve our serious attention, not political theater and a vanity project in order to please Donald Trump. If we want to rename the Gulf, let's at least be honest about what that says. That we're choosing to ignore science, history, and the pressing needs of coastal communities and the people we serve. That's why I propose an amendment to call it the Gulf of Ignorance, if that's really the way Republicans want to move forward. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. LaMalfa, you're recognized.
Maybe amend it to the Gulf of Hyperbole, the Gulf of Hysteria. Tick-tock, tick-tock, we're losing committee time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I don't think anybody will be surprised to know that I oppose this amendment. This amendment would actually rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Ignorance, which is, to me, a very demeaning name. I don't know if that's meant to demean the region, the president, the country, or the people that work in the Gulf and do a lot of good for our country. So obviously oppose the amendment. It's just one in a series of amendments that we will consider today that do nothing to improve the legislation before us. I urge all my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 3. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
I'll take the loss.
I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Huffman number 4.
Mr. Chair, I reserve a point of order on Huffman 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, colleagues, if we are going to waste important committee time renaming major geographic features for one man's ego,
Mr. Huffman, if you'll, without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
thank you.
Now you're recognized.
Now I'm recognized. All right. So, folks, if we're going to waste this committee's time just to glorify one man's ego, I propose that we at least be efficient about this, right? I mean, that's the theme of the day, efficiency from Doge and others. And so the great Wayne Gretzky once said, you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where it's going to be. And my amendment tries to do that. I mean, why do all of this Trump glorification in a piecemeal manner? Why not cut to the chase? And I am proposing that we rename the entire planet Trump. In the world that this administration is building and this committee is enabling, everything is about Donald Trump anyway. Republicans are proposing that we put his face on currency. His name is apparently going to go on Air Force One. You've introduced a bill to add his head to Mount Rushmore. His whims are shaping everything from who gets prosecuted to who gets silenced and who gets to participate in democracy. And so I would not be surprised if one of you actually proposes a 60-foot statue of him looming over the National Mall, as we've taken, some liberty to depict what that might be. We're trying to get ahead here and skate to where the puck is obviously going. So let's skip the endless parade of one-offs here. It's far more efficient to just cut to the chase, but let's be clear about what Planet Trump actually looks like. It's like a theme park from 1890, but with catastrophic climate dystopia. You're talking about the trade and economic policy of 1890, the foreign policy of 1890, science and education from the 1890s, deregulation and tax and wealth policy from the Gilded Age, the Wild West of gun violence for sure, but with modern, really destructive weapons. And back to the 1890s you go for health policy, civil rights, and a lot more. And a great example of that is our great scientific agency, NOAA, where thousands of scientists and public servants are being indiscriminately fired. These are people who forecast hurricanes, monitor climate trends, and protect our coasts. Apparently, it is back to the farmer's almanac when it comes to things like weather forecasting on planet Trump. So, to my colleagues across the aisle, you're not governing with this stuff. You're sabotaging. A government that doesn't work isn't an accident resulting from all of this chaos. It's actually the plan. And you are doing nothing about it. While it all burns down, this Republican majority is spending our time trying to rename bodies of water. If you want a world where science is sidelined, facts are optional, public service is gutted in favor of gold-plated self-promotion, congratulations, you're living on planet Trump. Let's stop pretending that any of this is about patriotism or efficiency. It is all about power, control, and making everything about one man. So let's just make it official. Show Donald Trump how mindlessly cultish you are. He's going to love this. Let's go ahead and rename the planet Planet Trump. I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. While I appreciate the ranking member's enthusiasm for President Trump, this amendment is outside the scope of the bill before us, which is to codify the name of the Gulf of America. I do urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Are we just going to vote, or are you going to do?
There is a point of order reserved.
And Mr. Chairman, I understand that you're prepared to, I guess, spend all of this time on this legislation, but objecting to germaneness to my amendment. So rather than subject all of this to that exercise, I will withdraw the amendment, but stand by everything I said, certainly, about it. I yield back.
Without objection, the amendment's withdrawn. I recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Velasquez number 6. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
It's number 6, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Renaming the Gulf of Mexico is a distraction from all the damage President Trump is doing to our country. My Republican colleagues have us here talking about names on maps while Trump's tariffs are making prices shoot up and our country sees the largest number of layoffs and workforce cuts since the pandemic. Elon Musk is slashing programs that many of our constituents depend on, like Social Security, SNAP, food assistance, and the low-income home energy assistance program for energy bills, just before summer heat waves. And let's not forget the threats to dismantle FEMA, even though communities across the country are still struggling to get back on their feet after another year of record-breaking climate disaster. That includes Hurricane Helene, which killed more than 230 people across Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Emergency crews raced to evacuate nursing homes and hospitals, and thousands of people were trapped in their homes for weeks with no electricity. Entire towns were washed away in the flooding and mudslides. Homes and critical infrastructure were destroyed. Experts estimate that all this damage might cost up to $200 billion to repair, making Helene one of the costliest storms in U.S. history. Part of what made Helene so harmful was that there was little time to prepare. The storm intensified overnight, going from scattered thunderstorms to a Category 4 in less than 2 days because of abnormally warm waters in the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico. While DOGE is dismantling NOAA by cutting over 1,000 jobs, which means less real-time data on developing storms and less accurate forecasting for hurricanes before they land. The reality is that climate change is making storms more intense, more frequent, less predictable, and more dangerous. As a Puerto Rican American, I know all too well the human cost of hurricanes and how hard it can be to rebuild. Puerto Rico is still recovering from Hurricane Maria in 2017, the only hurricane deadlier than Helene. This committee should not be having a debate over renaming the Gulf, but if we're going to have this conversation, let's talk about the millions still recovering from Hurricane Helene who will live with the scars of this storm for years to come. They have not forgotten Helene, and neither should we. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to rename it the Gulf of Helene instead of the Gulf of America. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to strongly support my colleague's amendment here. If we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico, what better thing to do than honor the victims and frontline communities that are facing the climate crisis in this region? This climate crisis caused Hurricane Helene's rainfall to be 10% heavier. And if global warming continues at the current rate and reaches 2 degrees Celsius, which under Trump energy policies it will, devastating rainfall events like Helene will be 15 to 20% more likely to happen. So we are perhaps months away from the next catastrophic hurricane in the Gulf. And as we prepare for that, as we contemplate that, the Trump administration is wrecking NOAA, so we might not have good weather forecasting and good data as we head into the hurricane season. They are gutting FEMA and talking about eliminating it altogether, so the next community that is wrecked by a catastrophic hurricane certainly will have a harder time getting the federal assistance that it desperately needs. And this committee and House Republicans are fiddling while Rome burns. Here we are spending valuable time debating a bill that does nothing at all worthwhile. So I think this amendment is entirely appropriate, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. This is now the third amendment we're considering that renames the Gulf of America, this time as the Gulf of Helene, and I sincerely hope the intent of this amendment is not to make light of the devastating impacts of Hurricane Helene. It's disappointing to see yet another amendment of this nature. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, designated Velasquez number 6. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted. I recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Brownlee number 31. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the Republican leadership on this committee has decided to waste valuable time discussing frivolous and performative name changes, let's just lean into it altogether. That's why my amendment would change the name of the Gulf to the Gulf of America should rejoin the Paris Agreement. The administration and the Republican leadership want to bury their heads in the sand and pretend that if we just don't say climate change, then climate change will not exist, all the while giving handouts to the biggest polluters to destroy our clean air and clean water. This is not the leadership the overwhelming majority of Americans are looking for. In 2023, polling found 74% of Americans support the United States' participation in international efforts to reduce climate change. One of the actions President Trump took on his first day in office was pulling the United States out of the Paris Agreement, the most fundamental international agreement to reduce climate change. It's felt like a lifetime ago since the early days of the Trump's presidency, and the GOP barreled full steam ahead on their anti-climate agenda, cutting critical investments in local communities, downsizing agencies' ability to respond to extreme weather events, and even wasting time and resources combing through agency documents to identify mere mentions of climate change. It's hard to track all the damage their actions have caused to the American public. But in the midst of all the chaos, we shouldn't forget some of the most harmful actions taken by this administration on Inauguration Day. So I urge support of my amendment. If my Republican colleagues want to claim that changing the Gulf to the Gulf of America highlights its importance for America's energy dominance, then I propose we instead consider changing our name to emphasize America's commitment to meeting our climate goals. With that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really like this amendment. Of course, I think congressional Democrats believe the entire exercise of trying to rename the Gulf of Mexico is a joke and a waste of time and a political circus. But if you think this is how Congress should be spending our time, renaming bodies of water, here's at least a renaming that would make a difference. I mean, if we called the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America should rejoin the Paris Agreement, that would stand as a constant reminder that science and climate reality are like real things, and that wrong-headed policies that wreck the planet for future generations are probably a pretty bad idea, and that America has a singularly important global leadership role to play on confronting this climate crisis. So here's actually a constructive suggestion. If you have to go down this path of burning Congress's time on name changes, let's change it in a way that would actually do something positive and make a difference. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose this amendment. It's another attempt to hijack the debate to talk about issues not connected to the legislation before us. The amendment does nothing to improve the legislation before us, and the decisions of the United States to participate or not participate in specific international agreements are a matter best debated in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, designated Brownlee number 31. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. And I'm going to request a recorded vote on this one.
Oh.
Further proceedings on the amendment designated Brownlee number 31 will be postponed. It's now in order to consider amendment designated Soto number 5, and I recognize Mr. Huffman for the purpose of offering the amendment. Without objection.
I have not offered.
You have not agreed to offer it.
We go to Brownlee while she's here?
I recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Brownlee 28. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We cannot have a conversation about the Gulf of Mexico without acknowledging the devastating threat oil and gas drilling poses to our coastal communities. There are over 95,000 miles of coastline in this country, stretching from the icy expanses of the Arctic to the tropical warmth of the Pacific, Atlantic, and Gulf coasts. Our coastal counties aren't just beautiful, they support 54.6 million jobs, $10 trillion in goods and services, and $4 trillion in wages. Yet during his first administration, President Trump proposed opening up more than 90% of the outer continental shelf for leasing, including 19 sails off the coast of Alaska, 7 in the Pacific region, 12 in the Gulf of Mexico, and 9 in the Atlantic region. This was the largest number of lease sales ever proposed for the National Outer Continental Shelf Program's 5-year lease schedule. As my colleagues can recall, this was a move that was universally unpopular across both sides of the aisle and with the public. And on this very first day back in office, President Trump moved to undo Biden-era protections, opening 16 million acres of our coasts, Pacific, Atlantic, and Alaskan waters, up to drilling. These actions are illegal, but it's not just a matter of legality, it's about what our constituents want. And the fact is, they don't want drilling, they want protection. Republicans and Democrats have long agreed our coastal communities and ecosystems are worth fighting for. I want to be extremely clear. A no vote on this amendment means that you want drilling in these areas to be on the table and not in the distant future in the next 5-year plan from the Department of Interior. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I could not agree more with Representative Brownlee on her amendment and her statements regarding offshore drilling on the Pacific and Atlantic coast. So look, we know that Donald Trump and the big oil oligarchs that he's surrounded himself with are coming for the Pacific and Atlantic coast. They may not be renaming them yet, but they're absolutely going to try to ruin them. And that's what happens when you drill for oil in sensitive places. That's why nobody in these coastal areas wants to see offshore drilling, and it shouldn't be controversial at all to pass an amendment like this that simply gives the people what they want. We're burning Congress's time today on things that nobody wants. But here's something that the people of California and Florida and so many other coastal communities actually do want. They want us to make our coasts off limits to oil drilling. So let's do that. It's a good amendment, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment?
No.
I recognize myself. I oppose this amendment. Domestic energy exploration and production, particularly on federal lands and waters, is crucial to America's energy and economic future. However, the bill before us does not impact offshore energy production, leasing activities, or withdrawals. I oppose the amendment and urge my colleagues to do the same. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? No further discussion. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, designated Brownlee number 28. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment designated Brownlee 28 will be postponed. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Soto number 5. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whether we call it the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, Florida Democrats and Republicans are united on making sure we continue to protect the eastern Gulf from oil drilling. This is a critical area for both military exercises, for recreational and professional fishing. Tourism is our top industry. You know, we have a lot of debates over energy over the years, but after those debates, a lot of colleagues on this committee have come up and said, you know, we're going to go on a vacation in the Panhandle, or we're excited to go to Tampa Bay, or we're thrilled to go down to Naples to enjoy your lovely beaches. And so, you know, don't you mess it up now, even right as we're debating some of these energy amendments. And so, you know, Florida is not just for Floridians, it's for every American. And we know, especially in the Southeast, a lot of folks from the Northeast go to our lovely beaches and enjoy amazing times with their families and get to do a lot of the recreation that has made our state so famous. And so we encourage all of our colleagues to vote for this amendment, and it comes on the heels of a bipartisan bill with Representatives Buchanan and Castor to do just this, which is to make sure that we're protecting the Eastern Gulf. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there, Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do support this amendment, and I think it's important to remember a little bit of the history on this issue. In January, at the end of his administration, President Biden issued a permanent withdrawal of the eastern Gulf of Mexico from oil and gas drilling. And this built on I guess, a less fulsome moratorium that had been issued under political pressure by President Donald Trump back in 2020. Unfortunately, President Trump, on his first day in office the second time around, revoked that permanent withdrawal, a decision that I believe is totally unsound both politically and legally. Americans do not want to see oil and gas drilling in the Eastern Gulf. They want us to protect the white sand beaches, the turquoise waters, the recreational value, and other things that Mr. Soto spoke so eloquently about. And we already know that the president's action is illegal because when President Trump has tried similar reversals in the past, courts have blocked him. Clearly, we cannot trust this president to keep our constituents or the rule of law in mind when it comes to environmental policies. We need to actually do something to protect our shores, and I urge my colleague to support Representative Soto's amendment, which would do just that. I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. Again, this amendment goes far beyond the scope of the bill before us, which is to simply codify the name of the Gulf of America. I'm sure we will have robust discussions about the Eastern Gulf in future hearings and when we consider future legislation, and I recognize there are those who oppose both windmills and offshore drilling in the Eastern Gulf. But again, the underlying bill here has absolutely nothing to do with leasing or activities that would be considered under withdrawals. I oppose the amendment, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Is there any further discussion?
You've been watching Live Impact News on WCNC Plus. If you thought a House Natural Resources Committee was going to be a boring hearing, no, not at all. The Gulf of America Act still being discussed. If you would like to continue, go to our app. It's a secondary channel. The NASA nomination for administrator is also on there. In the meantime, Charlotte Today is coming up next year at 11 on WCNC Plus. Thanks again and have a great day.
Chairman, renaming the Gulf of Mexico isn't a choice that should be up to just President Trump and even us here in Congress, especially not when Trump and his Republican allies are proving that they are shockingly out of touch with the wants and needs of the American people. On this issue alone, multiple polls have found that a supermajority, around 70% of Americans, oppose changing the name of the Gulf. And this debate is just a distraction from the many other unpopular policies my Republican colleagues are pushing, like cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, gutting supports for farmers, cutting wildfire preparation programs, and rolling back protections for clean air and clean water, to name just a few. These policies are so unpopular that many of my colleagues across the aisle have even stopped holding public town halls because of the backlash that they're getting from their own constituents. And just this weekend, mass protests took place across the country, from major cities to small, deep red towns. It's time we act like the democracy we are, and listen to the voices of the people we represent. For that reason, I'm offering this amendment, which would require a public comment period on the name change following all the requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act, none of the rushed box-checking exercises like the administration's recent 5-day public comment period on a lithium mine in Oregon. A real comment period to hear from the American people. If Congress wants to rename the Gulf of America, it should be after input from the American people and with the support of the American people. I urge adoption of this amendment, and I yield back.
The lady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this amendment, and I just can't imagine what Republicans would be afraid of by having a public comment period so that people could tell the administration what they think of this idea. I guess if you vote against this amendment, I guess we know what you're afraid of. We know that you realize that this is a dumb idea, that the overwhelming majority of Americans are going to tell you what a dumb idea it is, and they're probably going to tell you a lot more than that in a public comment period. But I do realize that, hearing from the people these days is a little bit out of favor across the aisle. I hope that this is a moment for you to reconsider this position that you've been taking, denying town halls, and what better way than to just have a simple public comment period on this knucklehead idea of renaming the Gulf of Mexico. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. The amendment would require the Department of Interior to conduct a public comment period pursuant to the Administrative Procedures Act. This amendment breaks with precedent and law, as name changes subject to executive orders or congressional direction are not required to go through the APA process. And I will note that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have offered 3 name changes to the Gulf of America, and I don't think there's been any kind of public comment period before those changes were proposed. I oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, designated Brownlee number 27. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
Julia, do you want to record it now? No.
I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Huffman number 2. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if Congress decides, against the overwhelming will of the American people, that we should officially rename the Gulf of Mexico, let's be very clear about what this move to call it the Gulf of America actually means. My amendment is a simple statement that puts the name change in context, because as I've mentioned before, President Trump was not the first one to come up with this idea. In fact, it was the late-night comedy host Stephen Colbert back in 2010. This was at a time when the Deepwater Horizon disaster was raging. And to quote Stephen Colbert, he said, "I don't think we can call it the Gulf of Mexico anymore. We broke it. We bought it." That was the joke, and now the joke is on us. As my amendment says, the 2010 disaster resulted in the deaths of 11 workers, 134 million gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf over 87 days, the demise of thousands of marine mammals and sea turtles, and billions of dollars in economic loss from the fishing, outdoor, recreation, and tourism industries resulted. Big oil broke the Gulf, and the American people had to foot the bill for most of that disaster. My amendment notes that that BP was allowed to deduct $15.3 billion of its historic $20 billion settlement with the federal government over the disaster on its taxes, a massive tax break for these billionaires on the backs of the American people. And we are just days away from the 15th anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Unfortunately, though, we are no closer to learning anything from it. The Trump administration is pushing ahead to expand drilling in the Gulf, including the ultra-deep water in the very area of the 2010 disaster. This deepwater drilling is especially dangerous because, as we saw in 2010, it is enormously difficult to reach and plug these wells when something goes wrong. It requires very specialized expertise and technology to work under incredibly technically challenging conditions. And as we've learned time and again, where you drill, you spill. That is a fact. It is unavoidable. And a spill in ultra deep water is especially tragic. Now, we are creating a perfect storm right now for the next catastrophic oil spill, because the Trump administration is opening a lot of these waters to more drilling, and Republican members of Congress are moving forward with mandating oil and gas leasing to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. And all of this while the administration is firing federal workers who keep us safe. They're the same agencies and workers that enforce safety regulations, that oversee the oil and gas industry to make sure they're not cutting corners, like the corners that were cut that led to the Deepwater Horizon disaster. So we are inviting more disasters, more deaths, more fish, birds, and coasts smothered in oil, more harm to the millions of people whose lives, livelihoods, and recreational interests depend on the Gulf of Mexico. So look, if you're going to set up these conditions for America to absolutely wreck the Gulf again, let's just be honest about what that renaming means. I urge support for my amendment, and I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Chairman.
Mr. Lamalfa, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was out in the hall for a minute, and I only caught part of the reason there. Was this the sludge ball that's going down the Klamath River from the removed dams in my district that we're talking about causing all the wildlife harm, or is that some other subject that I was missing there? I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Is that a question, an inquiry? I'd love to answer.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 2. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted. I recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Velasquez number 12. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment says that the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico should not take effect if it's going to cost taxpayers money. So as President Trump and co-President Elon Musk use DOGE to dismantle our government under the false pretenses of concerns about national debt. Here you are, adding to the national debt. If my colleagues care about government efficiency, they will not devote time and resources to this political stunt. It costs money to replace maps, signs, documents, brochures, and books. It takes real staff time, which costs money too. One estimate is upward of $1 billion. $500 million for highway and road signs, $200 million for maritime charts and digital navigation, $100 million for government documents, $50 to $150 million for education and textbooks. What we should all care about is the Trump-Musk administration taking apart core government functions by slashing critical funding and firing devoted public servants. It is jeopardizing our emergency preparedness and putting more lives at risk. It is cutting funding for environmental justice grants that invest directly in communities that have suffered the most because of climate disaster. It is blowing a hole in our economy by getting rid of tens of thousands of jobs across the country. It's dismantling the government that serves us day by day. Working families across the country deserve better than this spectacle. I urge support for my amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? I recognize Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I strongly support this amendment. And look, it's bad enough to be doing this naming bill that nobody wants, that the American people clearly think is a dumb idea. But it adds insult to injury to then put it on the taxpayers' tab and actually pay all of these costs that Ms. Velasquez just outlined. Is not insignificant, these costs. So look, if you have to do this just to kiss up to Donald Trump, just find one of your oligarchs to pay for it. Don't ask the American people, as they are sacrificing with so many of these cuts to things that they need in their lives, as you're gutting the Social Security Administration, getting ready to hammer Medicaid, doing all of these other reckless and indiscriminate cuts that will make their cost of living higher, their life more difficult. At least don't ask them to pay for this dumb thing. Get one of your oligarchs to do it. And I think passing this amendment is a great way to make sure that that is the case. I yield back.
Thank you. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I oppose the amendment. This amendment would effectively give the Congressional Budget Office or the CBO a veto power over legislation that is otherwise passed by Congress. While I oppose giving an unelected government official veto power over Congress, I do have good news for my colleagues, and that is that CBO is already required to produce a cost estimate for bills before Congress, and this bill is no different than that. I oppose the amendment and I yield back. If there is no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the, I recognize Mr. Lamalfa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was trying to remember back when I was in the state legislature, there was legislation to change the name of the California Department of Fish and Game to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. At the time when we asked, what's the price going to be? And they said, well, we're not going to immediately do that. We'll use up the supplies we have, you know, the letterhead and the patches on the shoulders and the tags on, you know, the stickers on the door of the vehicles and stuff. But within just a short amount of time, just a few months, it was all changed over anyway. I guess, Madam Chairman, I was just curious what that would have cost for that feel-good name change there in my home state of California, and how many people in this room supported that as well. But I'll yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If there is no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, designated Velasquez number 12. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not
Madam
adopted.
Chair, on that I request a recording vote.
A recorded vote has been requested, and further proceedings on the amendment designated Velasquez number 12 will be postponed. I recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Dexter, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Dexter number 15. Without objection, the amendment is considered read. Ms. Dexter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My amendment is simple. It states that the Gulf of Mexico cannot be renamed under this or any other act until the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Interior is fully funded. One of this committee's top priorities should be to protect the people whose jobs are to identify real waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption in the federal government. That is exactly the role of the Inspectors General. They are independent watchdogs. Every major federal agency has one, and they don't serve the president, they serve the public. They do not change from administration to administration because they look for inefficiency and corruption regardless of who occupies the White House. On January 24th, 2025, President Trump fired more than 15 inspectors general in an email that lacked the justification or the 30-day notice to Congress required by law. The 3 inspectors general in this committee's jurisdiction were all included in that mass firing: Department of the Interior, Department of Commerce, and Department of Agriculture. All 3 of these inspectors general were effective. Together, Mark Greenblatt, the former inspector general at the DOI, Phyllis Fong, the former inspector general for USDA, and Jill Basinger, the former inspector general at Commerce, uncovered serious wrongdoings and recovered hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer dollars. So it's no surprise that a president surrounded by a scandal wanted them gone. During Trump's previous term, it was the inspectors general who uncovered repeated misconduct. Their work exposed, documented, and reported ethics violations and financial abuses. Trump's decision to dismiss these inspectors general sends a clear message to their successors. Make the wrong finding and your job is at risk. This is an abuse of power and undermines the very purpose of these independent watchdogs. Protecting the independence of the inspectors general has been a bipartisan priority since Congress created the positions. Congress must stand up to protect them. We must also ensure that the independent and important work of the offices of the inspectors general continues. I urge strong support for my amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? I will recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. Inspectors general play an important role in fighting waste, fraud, and abuse in our government. However, the fiscal question raised by this amendment is not relevant to the bill before us. Funding priorities for fiscal year 2025 have already been signed into law, and while I'm certain there will be opportunities for the minority to engage the Committee on Appropriations to express their priorities for fiscal year 2026, this is not the right time for that. I oppose the amendment and I yield back. No further discussion on the amendment. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Dexter, designated Dexter number 15. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
Madam Chair, may I have a recorded vote, please?
A recorded vote has been requested, and further proceedings on the amendment designated Dexter number 15 will be postponed. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Dexter, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Dexter number 1. Without objection, the amendment is considered read. Ms. Dexter?
Thank you again, Madam Chair. My amendment number 1 would make it crystal clear that the renaming of this bill does not in any way infringe upon the freedom of the press. It also clarifies that this bill does not authorize the federal government to engage in retribution or censorship of a news organization that uses a name that reflects reality. Let's be real. This bill and the executive order it attempts to reinforce is not just absurd, it's unserious, ineffective, and quite frankly, beneath the dignity of this institution. Changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico doesn't make it so. The rest of the world will continue to call it what it is, the Gulf of Mexico. President Trump is obviously very unhappy that the press won't play along, going so far as to ban Associated Press reporters from the Oval Office over this nonsense. Our courts are standing up against these attacks, but let's not ignore the parallel here. These attempts are exactly the kind of behavior we see from authoritarian regimes. This is not the legacy our founding fathers and veterans have fought for. This must not become what this country stands for. Americans didn't ask for or vote for this name change. Americans struggle across the country while we were elected to defend the values that make this country strong, including our fundamental right to free speech. In the United States, we're constitutionally guaranteed the right to challenge power, to speak truth to it, and to laugh when leaders make ridiculous claims. That's not disrespect. It's critical for a healthy democracy. Frankly, ours is sick right now, and we must fight for it. This administration may have no regard for the Constitution, but Congress must. That's why I'm offering this amendment today. It's ludicrous that it has come to this. I implore us all to support this amendment, reaffirming our commitment to the U.S. Constitution, free speech, and a free and independent press. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Is there any further discussion on this amendment? Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I strongly support the gentlelady's amendment. You know, freedom of the press is a core American right. It always has been. And there's a reason why it is right up front in the Constitution, the very first amendment. The Gulf of America naming debacle gives us a perfect case study on the importance of the press in American democracy, because I've pointed out that one of the first uses of this Gulf of America saying, which actually started out as a joke, was comedian Stephen Colbert back in 2010 during the Deepwater Horizon disaster. But it turns out that the idea to rename the Gulf goes all the way back to the Bush administration and the Board of Geographic Names, which actually considered this but rejected it as a dumb idea back in 2006. But the USGS tried to keep that fact quiet once President Trump started talking about renaming the Gulf in 2025. How do we know this? Because of journalists. A journalist used the Freedom of Information Act to find out about this earlier attempt to change the name. If things continue the way they're going, those freedoms may not be around too much longer. Our colleagues across the aisle love to throw these words around and say that they're for freedom and liberty. But that flies right out the window whenever we encounter something that challenges Donald Trump. And at that point, it becomes cancel culture on ketamine. Canceling place names and history and all kinds of speech, canceling journalists and judges and media outlets. Students are being arrested, detained, and deported right now without any due process simply because of what they say, their protected speech. And we've got a Secretary of State who boasts of going through files on these folks and finding people that are saying things that he disagrees with and revoking their visas. That's what freedom of speech has come to under this administration. The president has sanctioned law firms for no other reason than the fact that they represented his political opponents. He kicked the Associated Press out of the White House press pool because they continue to use the term Gulf of Mexico. So look, this bill, the underlying bill we're considering today, is absolutely a joke. But MAGA attacks on our free press and free speech, this is really serious stuff. And this amendment is serious stuff. I urge my colleagues to vote for it, and I yield back.
I now recognize myself. I oppose this amendment, and I would encourage those members who wish to debate matters related to the freedom of the press to contact the Judiciary Committee. However, this amendment is unrelated to the underlying legislation, which aims to codify the name of the Gulf of America, and it does not improve the legislation. I oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If there is no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Dexter, designated Dexter number 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
Request to approve that.
A recorded vote has been requested, and further proceedings on the amendment designated Dexter number 1 will be postponed. I recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Rivas, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Rivas number 11. Without objection, the amendment is considered read. Ms. Rivas, am I saying your name correctly?
Rivas.
Rivas,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I discussed at length during the hearing for H.R. 276, the bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico is an unserious bill introduced solely to appeal to the vanity of the president. This bill does nothing to answer the questions that my constituents ask me when I go home. This past weekend, as the president won a participation trophy in his own golf tournament, my constituents continue to struggle with rising costs of their groceries. They worry if their Medicaid and Social Security benefits will be safe. And they juggle their working family without accessible or affordable childcare. Working families across the country are hurting, and frankly, they're scared. And here we are today debating frivolous bills like renaming the Gulf of Mexico, which will not alleviate their fears or instill confidence that this body can improve their lives. This is why I'm offering an amendment to H.R. 276 that actually addresses what working families care about. My amendment would ensure that the Gulf of Mexico cannot be renamed until the Secretary of the Interior can assess that this bill will actually lower grocery prices, improve the GDP, create jobs, and lower the unemployment rate, things that Americans care about. For context, the Department of the Interior's Office of Policy Analysis provides economic analysis on programs and policies within the department. And these analyses can better inform decision makers like this body to create policy that works for Americans. My amendment would require the Office of Policy Analysis to provide this committee with an assessment to determine if this bill would improve the economy and working families' daily lives. This includes lower food prices, including bringing the price of eggs below $4 per dozen, growth of the gross domestic product of at least 2 to 3% annually, create jobs, including adding at least 250,000 new jobs per month, and lower the unemployment rate to under 3%. Opposing my amendment today is saying that you don't care about lowering cost of living expenses, creating jobs, nor improving our economy. Supporting my amendment is a vote for the people. I urge support for my amendment, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think this is just a perfect amendment for this moment. We know President Trump really wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico. It's equivalent, the geographic equivalent perhaps of that participation trophy that he gave himself playing golf this weekend. It would really gratify his ego. But you know what? When he ran for president, he promised to do a lot of big and important things for the American people. He said that he would lower food prices, that he would bring the price of eggs down, that the economy would prosper, that he would create jobs, that he would lower unemployment rate. And we're going in the opposite direction. The economy is cratering. The stock market is crashing. Food prices are projected to continue rising higher than average this year, and that's before the tariffs and the trade wars started kicking in. So we are going the wrong way, folks, on core things that the American people thought they were getting, that President Trump promised he would deliver to them. And so what could be more appropriate than a little bit of accountability here? You only get your participation trophy. You only get your vanity renaming of the Gulf of Mexico if you actually deliver on all those things you said you would do. Great amendment by my colleague, and I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. Again, the purpose of this amendment is simply to rename the Gulf of America and codify that into law. If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Rivas, designated Rivas number 11. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The opinion of the chairs, the noes have it.
Mr. Chair, I request a recorded
A
vote.
recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment designated Rivas number 11 will be postponed. I recognize the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Anasari, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Anasari number 9. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find it extremely hypocritical that we are here today debating a meaningless bill that is nothing more than pandering to President Trump as Americans are on the brink of the next recession. I also find it extremely hypocritical that my Republican colleagues have promised over and over again to champion lower energy prices while at the same time rolling over on President Trump's tariff policies.